"Excuse me, sir. You need to move from this seat. We have a VIP passenger who requires this location." The words cut through the comfortable hum of Atlantic Airways Flight 247's business class cabin, silencing conversations and causing heads to turn. Senior flight attendant Monica Rivera stood in the aisle, her professional smile strained at the edges as she looked down at the passenger in seat 8A. Marcus Taylor glanced up from his legal brief, his calm eyes meeting hers. He was 44 tall, with broad shoulders, wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that spoke of success without needing to announce it. His expression remained neutral, neither surprised nor offended. He had experienced this moment too many times before. "I believe there must be some misunderstanding," Marcus replied, his voice measured and deep. "This is my assigned seat. I checked in hours ago and selected it specifically." Monica's smile tightened further. Behind her stood Julian Blackwood, late 50s silver-haired in an expensive navy suit, wireless earbuds in place. He was speaking loudly into his phone while glancing impatiently at the occupied seat, the type of man used to the world rearranging itself to accommodate him. "Mr. Blackwood is a Global Tier member," Monica explained, her voice loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "We need to accommodate his seating preference." The cabin fell uncomfortably silent. A businessman across the aisle suddenly became fascinated with his laptop screen. A woman 2 rows ahead pretended to search for something in her purse. No one made eye contact with Marcus. Julian ended his call and looked directly at Marcus, his gaze carrying an unmistakable message. Some people belonged in these seats, and others should be grateful to be allowed aboard at all. Marcus took a slow, deliberate breath as he considered his response, feeling the weight of decades of similar moments pressing down on him. But what no one on board knew was that within minutes this routine flight would become the epicenter of a power struggle that would expose dangerous secrets and change aviation forever. Marcus Taylor hadn't planned to become one of the most feared aviation attorneys in America. As a child in Baltimore, he had simply loved planes. His father, William Taylor, worked as an aircraft mechanic at BWI for 30 years, often bringing home stories about the massive machines he helped keep in the sky. On occasional Sundays, William would take young Marcus to the airport observation deck, teaching him to identify aircraft types by their silhouettes and explaining the intricate systems that kept them flying safely. "See that hydraulic line along the wing edge, son? If that fails, the pilot loses control of the flaps. That's why I check every single one, every single time." His father's words had stayed with him through the years. Those early lessons had instilled in Marcus not just a love of aviation, but a profound respect for the engineering precision and safety protocols that protected hundreds of lives on each flight. When he later chose to study law at Howard University, specializing in aviation regulations seemed a natural path. Now, at 44, Marcus was the senior partner at Taylor and Hamilton, a firm he had built from scratch into a powerhouse known for representing both victims of airline negligence and whistleblowers exposing safety violations. 3 weeks ago, he had won a landmark $4.2 billion settlement against Meridian Aircraft Manufacturing for knowingly installing defective oxygen systems across their fleet. The case had made headlines worldwide and sent shockwaves through the industry. Not that anyone on Flight 247 would know this by looking at him. Marcus had never been one to announce his achievements or intimidate with his credentials. His wife, Dr. Vanessa Taylor, often teased him about this quiet strength. "You could tell people you've argued before the Supreme Court twice, but instead you just smile and ask about their day." Vanessa, a respected neurosurgeon at Johns Hopkins, understood his approach. They had built their life together, understanding that excellence was the most effective response to prejudice. Today, Marcus was headed to London for an international arbitration case involving European aviation regulations. The documents in his briefcase contained evidence that could fundamentally change safety standards across continents. This wasn't a trip he could reschedule for anyone's convenience. As he sat in seat 8A, watching Monica Rivera's expectant face, Marcus knew exactly what was happening. It wasn't the first time he'd been asked to move to accommodate someone deemed more important. Each time he'd had to calculate the same equation, assert his rights and be labeled difficult or acquiesce, and surrender a small piece of his dignity. But something felt different today. Perhaps it was the particularly dismissive tone in Monica's voice, or the entitled expression on Julian Blackwood's face. Or perhaps it was simply that after 20 years of navigating these waters with perfect diplomacy, Marcus Taylor had finally reached his limit. "Sir, I need to insist." Monica's voice took on a sharper edge. "Mr. Blackwood always sits in this row when he flies with us." Marcus gently closed his legal brief and looked directly at her. "I understand your position, but I purchased this specific seat. My boarding pass clearly shows 8A. I have work that requires the window, and I selected it weeks ago." Julian Blackwood stepped closer, looming over Marcus. "Look, buddy, I don't have time for this. I have a meeting with the UK Finance Minister in 6 hours. His voice carried the absolute certainty of someone unaccustomed to hearing no. "I'm on my way to an important meeting as well," Marcus replied calmly. "Perhaps the airline can find you another window seat." Monica's smile vanished completely. "So Mr. Blackwood is a global tier passenger with over 3 million miles. We can move you to 14C, which is also a very nice seat." 14th is in the last row of business class next to the galley and lavatories, Marcus observed. "That's a significant downgrade from what I purchased." Several nearby passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A young black woman in row 10 discreetly angled her phone toward the Confrontation recording the exchange. "We can offer you a voucher for future travel." Monica suggested, her tone making it clear she was reaching the end of her patience. "I don't want a voucher," Marcus said. "I want the seat I paid for." Julian let out an exasperated sigh. "Jesus Christ, is this really happening right now? Do you know who I am?" Marcus looked at him steadily. "No, sir, I don't. And I don't believe that's relevant to the seating assignments." The temperature in the cabin seemed to drop several degrees as Julian's face flushed. He turned to Monica. "Get your supervisor. Now." "Yes, Mr. Blackwood," she replied quickly, then addressed Marcus with barely concealed hostility. "Sir, please understand you're delaying this flight for everyone." As she disappeared behind the cabin curtain, Julian stared down at Marcus. "You really don't know how to pick your battles, do you? I can make one call and ensure you never fly this airline again." Marcus held his gaze without flinching. "That would be unfortunate, but it wouldn't change the fact that this is my assigned seat." A murmur rippled through the cabin. The businessman across the aisle had stopped pretending to work and was openly watching. An older woman, a few rows ahead, whispered something to her companion. Within moments, Monica returned with a tall, serious-looking man in a purser's uniform. His name badge read Diego Hernandez. Lead purser. "What seems to be the problem here?" Diego asked, though his glance toward Monica suggested he'd already been briefed. "This passenger refuses to accommodate Mr. Blackwood, one of our most valued global tier members," Monica explained before Marcus could respond. Diego turned to Marcus, his expression stern. "Sir, I understand you've been asked to move to another seat to accommodate our premium passenger. The airline reserves the right to reassign seating when necessary." "Actually," Marcus replied, "the contract of carriage only permits involuntary reseating for safety or operational requirements. Preference for another passenger regardless of status isn't listed as a valid reason. I've read your airline's policies quite thoroughly." Diego blinked clearly, not expecting such a precise response. "Nevertheless, sir, we're asking for your cooperation." "And I'm declining politely," Marcus said. "I've broken no rules, caused no disturbance, and have a confirmed reservation for this specific seat." The confrontation had reached a stalemate, with neither side willing to back down. Julian checked his watch ostentatiously, his impatience radiating like heat. As the tense silence stretched on, something outside the window caught Marcus's attention. The late afternoon sun glinted off the wing, highlighting what appeared to be an unusual reflection along the left engine mount, a slight shimmering that shouldn't have been there. Marcus leaned closer to the window, momentarily forgetting the confrontation. The iridescent streak had a distinctive bluish-green tint that triggered an immediate memory. During the Meridian case, he had spent hours studying maintenance records and technical specifications, including hydraulic fluid characteristics. The particular shade he was seeing now looked remarkably like Aero 5000, the hydraulic fluid used in many commercial aircraft. A chill ran through him as his father's voice echoed in his mind. If that fails, the pilot loses control of the flaps. Outside, 2 ground crew members approached the wing, one pointing at the exact spot Marcus was observing. They spoke briefly, then one made a call on his radio. Within moments, they walked away, wiping their hands on rags. Marcus frowned. Had they addressed the issue or merely noted it? The apparent casualness of their departure concerned him. The aircraft's engines grew louder as the captain announced they were preparing for pushback. Time was running out for any decision. Sir, this is your final opportunity to cooperate before we're forced to take more serious measures, Diego was saying, his voice pulling Marcus's attention back to the confrontation. Julian had crossed his arms, radiating smug confidence that authority would side with wealth and status as it usually did. Marcus faced an unexpected dilemma. Should he continue defending his rightful seat against this discriminatory treatment, or should he raise an alarm about a potential safety issue that could be dismissed as merely a tactic to avoid being reseated? Either choice carried significant consequences. The plane shuddered slightly as it began to move away from the gate. Marcus made his decision. Some principles were worth fighting for, but not at the potential cost of human lives. Before we continue this discussion, he said carefully, I need to report something concerning about the left wing that requires immediate attention. Sir, this is completely unacceptable. Diego's voice hardened with barely concealed frustration. First, you refuse to comply with crew instructions, and now you're attempting to delay the flight with vague concerns. I assure you my concern is specific and substantive, Marcus replied. His focus split between the confrontation inside and the worrying signs outside the window. Julian Blackwood let out a derisive laugh. Oh, that's rich. Suddenly he's an aircraft mechanic too. Monica turned to Diego. We're already running 15 minutes behind schedule. The captain will not be pleased with further delays. Diego nodded, then turned back to Marcus. His posture stiffened as he shifted from persuasion to authority. Sir, at this point you leave me no choice. Either move to seat 14C immediately, or I'll be forced to contact airport security to have you removed from this aircraft. The cabin grew deadly quiet. Several passengers looked down, uncomfortable with the escalation, but unwilling to intervene. The young woman who had been recording discreetly slipped her phone into her pocket, eyes wide with concern. Marcus recognized the gravity of the moment. Being removed from an aircraft could result in being banned from the airline and possibly trigger a security review. For a black man, any confrontation with airport security carried additional risks. Yet the principle at stake and the potential safety issue he'd observed made capitulation impossible. He set his legal brief aside and looked directly at Diego. Since we've reached this point, I should introduce myself properly. I'm Marcus Taylor, senior partner at Taylor & Hamilton, specializing in aviation law and safety regulations. The effect was immediate but subtle. Diego's eyes widened slightly. Monica's professional mask slipped for just a second. I'm intimately familiar with both FAA regulations and your airline's contract of carriage. Marcus continued calmly. What you're attempting to do, remove a passenger from their confirmed seat to accommodate another passenger based solely on status, constitutes discriminatory treatment under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. Julian snorted dismissively. Oh, please, playing the race card now. This has nothing to do with, I didn't mention race. Mr. Blackwood. Marcus interrupted, his voice remaining steady. You did. I'm simply stating that preferential treatment based on status that results in adverse impact against protected classes may constitute discrimination under federal law. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Diego's face. Sir, I assure you this isn't about... Additionally, Marcus continued, FAA Regulation 14 CFR 91.3 establishes that the safety of an aircraft is the primary responsibility of all aviation personnel. The potential hydraulic fluid leak I've observed on the left wing falls under mandatory reporting requirements. Hydraulic fluid leak. Monica repeated, her voice suddenly less confident. Julian's expression shifted from annoyed to alarmed. What leak? There's no leak. He's making this up to avoid moving. An older man seated nearby who had been silently observing the confrontation leaned forward. Actually, I saw the ground crew looking at something on the wing earlier. They seemed concerned. Diego found himself in an increasingly difficult position, caught between enforcing perceived authority and addressing a potential safety concern raised by someone who clearly knew aviation regulations. Mr. Taylor, he said, his tone noticeably more respectful. While I appreciate your concern, our maintenance team conducts thorough pre-flight inspections. If there were any issues, I observed 2 ground crew members examining the precise area I'm concerned about just minutes ago. Marcus interrupted. They appeared to note it, but did not complete any repairs. I would strongly recommend having it re-examined before takeoff. Monica leaned closer to Diego, whispering something urgently. The confrontation had shifted with uncertainty, replacing the previous confidence. Julian, however, wasn't ready to concede. This is ridiculous. He's just trying to save face. I have a critical meeting in London and I will not miss it because some lawyer wants to play games. Marcus turned to him, his expression serious. Mr. Blackwood. I understand the importance of your schedule. I have critical obligations in London as well. But no meeting, no matter how important, is worth risking safety. You expect us to believe you can identify a hydraulic leak from a passenger window? Julian scoffed. Yes, Marcus replied simply. My father was an aircraft mechanic for 30 years. I've been involved in multiple aviation safety cases, including the recent Meridian settlement. The distinctive color and location of the fluid I'm observing is consistent with a Type A hydraulic fluid leak near the wing-mounted actuator assembly. His precise terminology caused several nearby passengers to exchange worried glances. This was not someone making vague claims. This was an expert raising specific concerns. Diego straightened his uniform, making a decision. I'll inform the captain of your concern, Mr. Taylor. In the meantime, please remain in your seat until we resolve this matter. Julian's face contorted with rage. You can't be serious. You're actually listening to this. Do you know who I am? Yes, Mr. Blackwood. We're well aware of your status, Diego replied carefully. However, safety protocols require us to investigate any credible concern. As Diego stepped away to contact the cockpit, the power dynamic in the cabin had unmistakably shifted. Marcus hadn't raised his voice or made threats. He had simply stood firm in his knowledge and rights, refusing to be moved by intimidation or status. The confrontation was far from over, but in that moment, dignity had scored an important victory over discrimination. Cabin to cockpit. We have a situation. Diego spoke into his radio, stepping toward the front galley for privacy. His voice was low, but the tension in it carried through the quiet cabin. Marcus remained seated, his attention divided between the ongoing drama inside and the concerning shimmer on the wing outside. The distinctive blue-green tint of the fluid was unmistakable to his trained eye. Aero 5000 hydraulic fluid essential for controlling the aircraft's flaps, ailerons, and landing gear. A serious leak could potentially render these systems inoperable during flight. Monica hovered nearby, her previous confidence replaced by uncertainty. Julian paced the aisle, his face flushed with anger and frustration. "This is completely unacceptable," Julian muttered loudly enough for others to hear. "I'm on the board of this airline's parent company. Heads will roll for this nonsense." A few rows back, a passenger whispered to her seatmate, "Is there really something wrong with the plane?" The question rippled through the cabin, anxiety spreading like a contagion. Diego returned, his expression now serious. "The captain has acknowledged your concern, Mr. Taylor. She's requesting more specific information about what you're observing." Marcus nodded and pointed toward the window. "There's a visible fluid trail extending approximately 18 inches along the left wing root adjacent to the inboard flap actuator. The fluid has a distinctive blue-green color characteristic of Aero 5000 hydraulic fluid. It appears to be actively seeping, not just residual." His precise terminology seemed to convince Diego that this wasn't a casual observation or delay tactic. "The captain is contacting ground maintenance for an inspection," Diego confirmed. "We'll remain at the gate until this is resolved." Julian threw up his hands in exasperation. "This is absurd. I've flown 10 million miles, and suddenly some random passenger thinks he knows more than the pilots and maintenance crew." An older gentleman across the aisle cleared his throat. "Actually, if he's Marcus Taylor from Taylor and Hamilton, he probably does know what he's talking about. Didn't you just win that massive case against Meridian Aircraft?" Marcus nodded slightly but didn't elaborate. He wasn't interested in using his professional credentials as leverage. He simply wanted the potential safety issue addressed. "If there's any possibility of a hydraulic leak, it absolutely must be investigated," Marcus stated firmly. "At cruising altitude, a minor leak can rapidly worsen due to pressure differentials. If the fluid reservoir depletes during flight control surfaces, may become unresponsive during landing, precisely when they're most critically needed." Several passengers exchanged concerned glances. A woman in a business suit, who had been typing on her laptop, closed it and leaned forward, listening intently. "The maintenance team has been notified and is on their way." Diego announced his earlier confrontational stance, now replaced by professional concern. "Captain Rodriguez asks that everyone remain seated while we address this matter." Monica approached Julian, speaking quietly. "Mr. Blackwood, perhaps I can find you another suitable seat for now. We have 3A available, which is also a window in the first row." Julian glared at Marcus, then at Monica. "This is all an act. He just doesn't want to give up his seat." "So we're required to investigate any safety concern, regardless of its source." Monica replied, her tone carefully neutral. "I assure you we're working to resolve this as quickly as possible." Outside the window, 2 maintenance workers in high-visibility vests appeared carrying equipment. They approached the left wing and began examining the exact area Marcus had indicated. "See, they're checking it now," a young man commented from across the aisle. Marcus said nothing, watching as one technician crouched down, running a gloved finger along the wing surface and examining the residue. The technician showed something to his colleague, who immediately reached for his radio. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere had transformed. What had begun as a confrontation over seat assignments had evolved into a genuine safety concern. Even the most skeptical passengers were now watching the maintenance crew with interest. "Mr. Taylor," Diego said, returning from another consultation with the cockpit, "the maintenance team has confirmed they're observing something on the wing surface. They're conducting further tests to determine if it's hydraulic fluid and the severity of any potential leak." Julian fell silent, his earlier bravado diminishing as reality set in. If there was indeed a safety issue, his insistence on moving Marcus would be remembered not just as entitled, but potentially dangerous. "How serious could this be?" asked a nervous passenger from row 9. "Are we in danger?" "There's no immediate danger while we're on the ground," Marcus explained calmly. "That's precisely why it's crucial to identify these issues before takeoff. Hydraulic systems are essential for controlling the aircraft during flight. Any compromise to their integrity must be thoroughly evaluated." His measured response seemed to reassure those nearby. He wasn't causing panic, just advocating for proper safety protocols. Outside, more maintenance personnel had arrived now, bringing testing equipment and tools. The activity around the wing had intensified, suggesting the initial inspection had indeed revealed something concerning. "Ladies and gentlemen," came Captain Sandra Rodriguez's voice over the intercom. "This is your captain speaking. We are currently addressing a potential technical issue that has been brought to our attention. I've requested a complete inspection of the left wing hydraulic system before departure. Your safety is our absolute priority, and we appreciate your patience during this delay." The announcement validated Marcus's concern, transforming him in the eyes of fellow passengers from an obstinate traveler to someone potentially saving lives. Diego approached again now with a completely different demeanor. "Mr. Taylor, the captain, would like to personally thank you for bringing this to our attention. The maintenance team has confirmed hydraulic fluid seepage from a connector near the inboard flap actuator." Monica stood nearby, her earlier hostility replaced by what appeared to be genuine remorse. Julian had retreated to a seat several rows away, suddenly fascinated by his phone screen. The confrontation over seat 8A had unexpectedly revealed something far more important than the entitlement of a single passenger or the dignity of another. It had exposed a potentially catastrophic safety issue that might have gone unnoticed until it was too late. "What's the status on that maintenance check?" Captain Sandra Rodriguez's voice crackled through Diego's radio. At 51, she was a 25-year veteran pilot with a reputation for meticulous attention to safety protocols. Diego stepped away from the increasingly concerned passengers, turning slightly toward the galley. "Maintenance is actively inspecting the left-wing hydraulic assembly. They've confirmed fluid presence and are determining the source and severity." "Copy that," Captain Rodriguez replied. "Keep me updated every 5 minutes. If this is confirmed as an active hydraulic leak, we'll need to cancel the flight and transfer everyone to the backup aircraft." Diego acknowledged the instruction, then returned to the cabin where the atmosphere had grown tense. Passengers were craning their necks to see out windows, whispering anxiously to one another. Monica stood near Marcus's seat, her earlier confidence replaced by visible discomfort. Julian had moved to a seat in row 6, but continued to glare occasionally in Marcus's direction. "The captain has requested regular updates," Diego announced to the cabin. "We appreciate your continued patience while the maintenance team completes their inspection." A businessman in row 7 raised his hand. "How long will this take? Some of us have connections in London." "Safety inspections take as long as necessary," Diego replied diplomatically. "We understand the inconvenience, but thoroughness is essential." Outside, the maintenance activity had intensified. 3 technicians now surrounded the left wing, one lying beneath it with a specialized light, while another took photographs. The 3rd technician was speaking animatedly into a radio, gesturing toward a specific section of the wing. Marcus observed all this silently, his vindication bringing no pleasure. A hydraulic system failure was precisely the kind of potentially catastrophic issue that kept aviation safety experts awake at night. If the leak had gone undetected and worsened during flight, the consequences could have been devastating. Monica approached Marcus, her demeanor completely transformed. "Mr. Taylor," she said quietly, "I owe you an apology for my earlier behavior. I was focused on accommodating Mr. Blackwood without fully considering your rights as a passenger." Marcus nodded, appreciating the gesture, but still processing the unfolding situation. "Thank you for saying that. I understand the pressures of your position." Julian, overhearing this exchange, stood up abruptly. "This is ridiculous. We've been sitting here for 40 minutes. I'm going to miss my meeting with the finance minister." Diego moved quickly to intercept him. "Please return to your seat, Mr. Blackwood. We're still addressing the technical issue." "What technical issue?" Julian snapped. "So there's a little fluid on the wing. Planes leak all the time. It's probably just condensation or rain." An elderly woman nearby gasped at his callousness. A murmur of disapproval spread through the cabin. Sir Diego said firmly, "The maintenance team is conducting a professional assessment. Until they complete their work, and the captain makes her determination, all passengers must remain seated." Julian's face reddened. "Do you know how much money I've spent with this airline? Millions, and this is how you treat your top customers by letting some random passenger delay an entire flight." Marcus remained composed, not engaging with Julian's outburst. His attention was focused on the maintenance activity outside, where the technician's body language suggested increasing concern. Diego's radio crackled again. "Hernandez, this is Captain Rodriguez. Please come to the cockpit immediately." As Diego hurried forward, the cabin fell into uneasy silence. Even Julian seemed to sense that something significant was happening. 2 minutes later, Diego returned, his expression grave. He conferred briefly with Monica and 2 other flight attendants, who nodded and moved to their positions throughout the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen," Diego announced, "I've just spoken with Captain Rodriguez. The maintenance team has confirmed an active hydraulic fluid leak from the left wing inboard flap actuator assembly. For your safety, this flight will be cancelled." A collective groan rose from the passengers, though it was tinged more with resignation than anger. "Atlantic Airways will rebook all passengers on the next available flight to London." Diego continued, "We sincerely apologize for the inconvenience, but your safety is our absolute priority." As the reality of the situation sank in, passengers began gathering their belongings. Some cast grateful glances toward Marcus. Others looked relieved despite their disrupted travel plans. Julian remained standing in the aisle, seemingly stunned by this turn of events. "This can't be happening," he muttered. "I don't believe there's actually anything wrong with this plane." A technician in a high-visibility vest appeared at the aircraft door, speaking urgently to Diego, who nodded gravely. "Ladies and gentlemen," Diego addressed the cabin again. "The maintenance supervisor has informed me that the hydraulic leak is significant. Had this aircraft departed, there would have been a substantial risk of control system failure during flight." The cabin fell completely silent as the implications of this statement registered. In other words, Diego continued, his voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. The observation made by Mr. Taylor potentially prevented a very serious in-flight emergency. "On behalf of the crew, I want to express our sincere gratitude." All eyes turned to Marcus, who remained composed despite the attention. This wasn't about recognition or validation for him. It was about ensuring that safety was never compromised for convenience or status. Monica approached Julian, who still stood frozen in the aisle. "Mr. Blackwood, we'll arrange priority rebooking for you on the next available flight." Julian said nothing, the gravity of the situation finally penetrating his entitlement. Had the flight proceeded, as he demanded, his critical meeting might never have occurred at all. As passengers began to disembark, Marcus remained seated, allowing others to exit first. He had stood his ground not just for his own dignity, but unwittingly for everyone's safety. The confrontation that began with discrimination had revealed something far more significant. A reminder that in aviation, status and wealth mean nothing when faced with the impartial physics of flight. The cabin door reopened as a stocky man in a maintenance uniform stepped aboard. Grey-haired, with decades of experience etched into his face, he surveyed the half-empty cabin before approaching Diego. "Head mechanic wants to speak with the passenger who reported the leak," he announced. Diego nodded and gestured toward Marcus. "Mr. Taylor in 8A identified the issue." The mechanic made his way down the aisle, stopping beside Marcus's seat. "Mark Ramirez, lead maintenance supervisor." He introduced himself, extending a hand. "You the one who spotted our problem?" Marcus shook his hand. "Marcus Taylor. Yes, I noticed what appeared to be hydraulic fluid along the wing route." Mark nodded, impressed. "Most passengers wouldn't recognize Aero 5000 if they were swimming in it." "You've got a good eye. My father was an aircraft mechanic," Marcus explained. "He taught me what to look for." "Well, your father taught you well," Mark said gravely. We've confirmed a Class 2 hydraulic leak from the primary flap control system. The high-pressure line feeding the left inboard actuator has a failed seal where it connects to the distribution manifold. Marcus understood immediately the seriousness of this finding. That would have worsened dramatically at altitude. Exactly, Mark agreed. Pressure differentials at 38,000 feet would have accelerated the leak rate. Best-case scenario, the system would have maintained enough pressure to land safely, but with reduced control authority. Worst case? He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. By now, most passengers had disembarked, but a few remained listening intently to this exchange. Captain Rodriguez asked me to personally thank you. Mark continued. This kind of catch before takeoff is exactly what prevents incidents from becoming accidents. Monica stood nearby, her earlier haughtiness completely gone. Julian Blackwood had already departed, leaving without a word to anyone. The intercom crackled to life. This is Captain Rodriguez speaking. Before the remaining passengers disembark, I want to extend my personal gratitude to Mr. Marcus Taylor in seat 8A. His vigilance in identifying a serious hydraulic leak potentially prevented an emergency situation during our flight. This exemplifies why safety is everyone's responsibility in aviation. A spontaneous round of applause broke out among the few remaining passengers. An elderly couple nodded respectfully toward Marcus. The young woman who had been recording earlier gave him a thumbs up. Diego approached, his demeanor completely transformed from their earlier confrontation. Mr. Taylor, on behalf of the crew, I want to apologize for how this situation was initially handled. Your right to your assigned seat should have been respected without question. I appreciate that, Marcus replied simply. The airline will of course arrange alternative transportation to London for you with our compliments. Diego continued. Captain Rodriguez has also requested a full review of our passenger accommodation policies to ensure nothing like this happens again. Marcus nodded, gathering his briefcase. I hope that review includes training on recognizing and addressing potential bias in passenger interactions. Diego looked uncomfortable but didn't disagree. I believe it will, sir. This incident has highlighted several areas where our procedures need improvement. As Marcus finally rose to leave Mark, Ramirez offered one final comment. You know, in 27 years of aircraft maintenance, I've seen maybe 3 passengers correctly identify a technical issue. Most people are too busy watching movies or sleeping to notice what's happening outside their window. Keeping your eyes open might have saved a lot of lives today. Marcus thought about this as he walked toward the exit. He had spent his career fighting for aviation safety through legal channels, depositions, courtrooms, and settlement negotiations. Today he had made perhaps his most direct contribution to passenger safety simply by refusing to be moved from his rightful place and keeping his eyes open to the world around him. As he stepped off the aircraft, he knew this incident was far from over. What had begun as a confrontation over a seat assignment had evolved into something with much broader implications for airline safety procedures, for passenger rights, and for addressing the subtle and not so subtle discrimination that remained embedded in air travel. The young woman who had been recording approached him in the jetway. Mr. Taylor. I'm a Mara Okafor journalism student at Columbia. I recorded what happened back there. People need to see this, both the discrimination and how you potentially saved everyone on board. Would you be willing to talk about your experience? Marcus considered her request carefully. He had never sought the spotlight, preferring to let his work speak for itself. But perhaps this incident needed to be shared not for his own recognition, but for the changes it might inspire. Let me get to London first, he replied. I have an important case to handle. But yes, I think this story should be told. As they walked into the terminal, neither of them could have predicted how quickly and dramatically that story would spread, or how it would ultimately transform an entire industry's approach to both safety and equality. The private lounge reserved for global tier members was eerily quiet, when Thomas Bennett, airport director for Atlantic Airways, entered with purposeful strides. At 58, with salt and pepper hair and the weathered face of someone who had navigated countless aviation crises, Bennett had a reputation for handling difficult situations with calm efficiency. He scanned the room quickly, identifying Marcus Taylor sitting alone near the window, reviewing documents from his briefcase. Mr. Taylor Bennett approached, extending his hand. Thomas Bennett, Airport Director. On behalf of Atlantic Airways, I want to personally apologize for your experience today. Marcus looked up, surprised by the senior executive's presence. He shook Bennett's hand. Thank you for coming personally. I appreciate that. May I? Bennett gestured to the chair across from Marcus. Please, Marcus nodded. Bennett sat, his expression grave. I've reviewed the preliminary reports from both the cabin crew and maintenance team. To say this was a failure on multiple levels would be an understatement. I'm just glad the technical issue was identified before takeoff, Marcus replied diplomatically. Yes, thanks entirely to you, Bennett acknowledged. Our standard pre-flight inspection should have caught that hydraulic leak. The fact that it didn't is concerning enough. But the way you were treated by our staff when you attempted to raise the alarm is completely unacceptable. The lounge door opened again, and a tall woman in an executive suit entered, scanning the room before spotting Bennett and walking over. Mr. Taylor. This is Elizabeth Ramirez, our VP of Operations. Bennett introduced her. Mr. Taylor, she greeted him with a firm handshake. I came as soon as I heard what happened. This incident represents a serious deviation from our standards and values. Marcus noted the urgency in her manner. This wasn't just routine damage control. I appreciate your concern, Ms. Ramirez. May I ask what specific actions Atlantic Airways is taking in response? Elizabeth nodded, appreciating his directness. Immediate steps include a full investigation into both the technical failure and the crew's behavior. Senior Flight Attendant Rivera and Lead Purser Hernandez have been placed on administrative leave pending review. And the hydraulic leak itself? Marcus inquired. Our maintenance division is conducting a comprehensive inspection of all similar aircraft in our fleet, she explained. The particular connection that failed on your aircraft has been flagged for priority checking across all our Boeing models. Thomas Bennett cleared his throat. Mr. Taylor, we understand you're an aviation attorney with Taylor & Hamilton. We want to be completely transparent about our response to this incident. Marcus nodded, recognizing the subtle acknowledgement of his professional stature. I'm not looking to pursue litigation if that's your concern. My interest is in seeing meaningful improvements to both safety protocols and passenger treatment. Relief flickered briefly across Bennett's face. That's our priority as well. Beyond the immediate personnel actions, we're implementing an emergency review of our VIP accommodation policies. The practice of moving passengers based solely on status is being suspended effective immediately. That's a positive step, Marcus acknowledged. Though I would suggest it needs to be permanently eliminated, not just suspended. Agreed, Elizabeth said firmly. This incident has exposed a significant blind spot in our training and procedures. We're also bringing in external consultants to conduct a comprehensive review of our approach to equity and inclusion across all passenger interactions. As they spoke, Marcus noticed activity near the lounge entrance. Several people with press badges were being turned away by security. Bennett followed his gaze. The incident has attracted media attention. Apparently, several passengers shared videos of the confrontation online. I see Marcus replied, unsurprised, but not particularly pleased by this development. He had never sought publicity. We've prepared a statement, Elizabeth explained, acknowledging the incident and outlining our response. We'd welcome your input before we release it. Marcus appreciated the gesture but shook his head slightly. I think it's more appropriate for Atlantic Airways to determine its own public response. My focus is on getting to London for my case. Of course, Bennett nodded. We've arranged for you to take our partner airline's flight departing in 3 hours. First class naturally, and we've already notified your London hotel about the schedule change. Thank you, Marcus said. That's very efficient. Elizabeth hesitated before adding, "There's one more thing, Mr. Taylor. A number of passengers from Flight 247 have reached out to express their gratitude. They understand how your actions potentially prevented a serious incident." "That's not necessary," Marcus replied modestly. "Anyone with knowledge of aircraft systems would have done the same." Perhaps Bennett said, "But not everyone would have had the courage to stand their ground against the pressure you faced, both for refusing to give up your rightful seat and for insisting on a safety inspection despite resistance." As they spoke, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message from his wife, Vanessa. "Just saw the news. Are you okay? So proud of you. Call me when you can." The incident was clearly spreading beyond the confines of the airport. What had begun as a personal confrontation was rapidly becoming something much larger. "Mr. Taylor, Elizabeth said we would like to offer compensation for the inconvenience and distress caused today. We understand no amount can truly address what happened," but Marcus raised a hand to politely interrupt. "I don't want special treatment or compensation. What I would prefer is confirmation that Atlantic Airways will implement meaningful changes to prevent similar incidents in the future, both the technical oversight and the discriminatory seating practices." Bennett and Elizabeth exchanged glances, clearly impressed by his response. "You have my word," Elizabeth assured him. "This incident has already triggered a fundamental reassessment of our procedures. I'll personally ensure that these issues are addressed at the highest levels of the organization." As they concluded their conversation, Bennett handed Marcus his business card. "Please contact me directly if you have any concerns or suggestions as we move forward. Your perspective would be invaluable." Marcus accepted the card with a nod. As the executives departed, he turned to look out the window at the tarmac below, where maintenance crews were still swarming around Flight 247. The confrontation that had begun over a seat assignment had evolved into something far more significant, a catalyst for examining the ingrained practices that too often placed status above safety and dignity. His phone buzzed again. Another news alert about the incident. The story was spreading, and with it perhaps the opportunity for real change. The rebooking counter at Gate 32 was chaotic. Dozens of displaced passengers from Flight 247 formed a restless line, many on phones explaining delays to colleagues and family members. At the front of this line, Julian Blackwood's voice rose above the general murmur. "This is completely unacceptable," he shouted, his face flushed with anger. "I'm a global tier member with over 10 million miles. I demand immediate rebooking on a private charter if necessary." The gate agent, a young Hispanic woman named Lucia Rodriguez, maintained a professional demeanor despite Julian's escalating hostility. "Mr. Blackwood, I understand your frustration. We're rebooking all passengers as quickly as possible. The next flight to London departs in 3 hours. 3 hours, Julian slammed his hand on the counter. "I have a meeting with the UK Finance Minister. Do you have any idea what's at stake?" Several passengers had begun recording the outburst on their phones. Julian, too, absorbed in his entitlement, failed to notice. "Sir, please lower your voice," Lucia requested calmly. "We're doing everything possible to accommodate everyone affected by the cancellation." "Everyone," Julian sneered. "I'm not everyone. I'm CFO of Blackwood Investments. My company owns significant shares in your parent corporation." A young man waiting in line muttered audibly, "Yeah, and your tantrum almost got us all killed." Julian whirled around. "What did you say?" "You heard me," the man replied, undaunted. "That flight was cancelled because there was a serious hydraulic leak. The same flight you were trying to force to depart by bullying that black passenger out of his seat." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Julian suddenly realized he was surrounded by witnesses from Flight 247, people who had seen his behavior and now understood the potential consequences. That's completely inaccurate," Julian stammered, his authority evaporating. "I was simply requesting my usual seat." We all saw what happened, an older woman interjected. That gentleman spotted a dangerous leak that maintenance missed, and instead of thanking him, you treated him like he was beneath you. Julian's phone rang. He glanced at it, his assistant calling with what was undoubtedly more bad news about his missed meeting. He declined the call. Look, he addressed Lucia again, attempting to lower his voice. I just need to get to London as soon as possible. Surely you can arrange something for a passenger of my status? I'm rebooking all passengers in order of check-in time. Mr. Blackwood, Lucia replied evenly. Company policy during irregular operations. Julian's face contorted with disbelief. This is outrageous. Get me your supervisor immediately. As if on cue, a middle-aged man in an Atlantic Airways management uniform approached. Is there a problem here, Carlos? Julian recognized the supervisor from previous flights. Finally, someone who understands customer service. I need to be on the next flight to London. First-class window seat. Carlos Martinez regarded Julian with a cool professionalism that contrasted with the familiarity Julian had assumed. Mr. Blackwood, I've been briefed on the situation aboard Flight 247. Given the circumstances, I'm afraid we need to have a difficult conversation. Julian blinked, confused. What conversation? Just rebook me. Sir, based on reports from multiple crew members and passengers, your behavior toward both our staff and fellow travelers violated our passenger code of conduct. Carlos stated formally. Particularly concerning was your insistence on continuing the flight despite a known safety issue. That's absurd, Julian protested. I didn't know there was actually a problem with the plane. Nevertheless, you attempted to pressure our crew into disregarding a legitimate safety concern. Carlos continued. This, combined with your documented mistreatment of staff and fellow passengers, has triggered a review of your travel privileges with Atlantic Airways. The surrounding passengers had fallen silent, watching this unexpected development with interest. What are you saying? Julian asked, his voice suddenly less certain. Effective immediately, your global tier status has been suspended pending review, Carlos informed him. You will be rebooked on the next available flight in economy class, and a formal investigation has been opened regarding your future travel eligibility with our airline. Julian stood speechless, his world collapsing around him. His phone buzzed again. A news alert this time. He glanced down and froze. The headline read, CFO of Blackwood Investments at Center of Airline Discrimination Incident. Below it was a still image from a passenger's video, clearly showing Julian looming over Marcus Taylor, his face contorted with entitlement and anger. This is a mistake, Julian stammered, holding up his phone. They're making me out to be some kind of villain. Perhaps you should contact your company's PR department, Carlos suggested diplomatically. Now, would you like to be rebooked in economy, or would you prefer to make alternative travel arrangements? The question hung in the air, stripping away the last vestiges of Julian's perceived superiority. Around him, passengers who had witnessed his behavior aboard Flight 247 showed varying degrees of satisfaction at this reversal of fortune. I'll take the economy seat, Julian finally muttered, all fight draining from him. As he shuffled away from the counter, Julian's phone rang again. This time it was from the CEO of Blackwood Investments. With shaking hands, he answered. Julian came the terse voice of CEO Patricia Hammond. There's a video going viral showing you berating an African-American passenger who apparently prevented a major airline disaster. Care to explain before our stock opens tomorrow? Julian looked around the terminal, suddenly aware that his private behavior had become very public. The carefully constructed image he had maintained throughout his career, the respected financial leader, the tough but fair executive, was unraveling in real time, replaced by the reality of who he truly was when he thought no one who mattered was watching. It's not what it looks like, he began weakly, but even as the words left his mouth, he knew they rang hollow. In the span of an hour, Julian Blackwood had gone from a powerful executive whose mere presence commanded special treatment, to a cautionary tale about entitlement and discrimination. And somewhere in his mind, he began to recognize that the seat he had so desperately wanted, 8A on Flight 247, might ultimately have cost him far more than he could have imagined. The London Westbridge Hotel's presidential suite offered a panoramic view of the Thames lights from historic bridges reflecting off the water like scattered stars. Marcus Taylor stood at the window phone to his ear, tie loosened after a long day that had begun in New York and taken an unexpected detour through viral fame. The hotel staff practically rolled out a red carpet when I arrived, he told Vanessa, his voice tinged with bemused discomfort. Apparently I'm something of a celebrity now. You're all over the news here, Vanessa confirmed from their Baltimore home. CNN, MSNBC, even Fox is covering it. They're calling you the hero of Flight 247. Marcus sighed, leaning against the window frame. I'm no hero, Van. I just refused to be displaced from a seat I paid for and happened to notice a technical issue in the process. Don't downplay this, Marcus. Vanessa replied, her voice gentle but firm. Standing up for yourself in that situation took real courage. You know how these confrontations can escalate, especially for black men. The truth of her words hung between them. Throughout their 15-year marriage, Vanessa had witnessed Marcus navigate countless spaces where his presence was questioned or his authority challenged. As a neurosurgeon, she faced similar barriers, though in different contexts. I keep thinking about what could have happened if I'd given in, Marcus admitted. If I'd quietly accepted being moved to 14C just to avoid conflict. But you didn't, Vanessa said. And that hydraulic leak might have gone unnoticed until it was too late. Marcus walked to the suite's elegant desk, where his laptop displayed dozens of email notifications and social media alerts. One message from Thomas Bennett, the Atlantic Airways airport director, informed him that the investigation had already found the leak was caused by improper maintenance documentation. The connector had been flagged for replacement, but never entered into the service schedule. It's strange, Marcus reflected. All my career I've fought for aviation safety through legal channels, courtrooms, depositions, settlements. But today, the most direct impact I've ever had came from simply refusing to move from my assigned seat. Sometimes the most powerful act of resistance is just occupying your rightful place, Vanessa observed. My grandmother used to say that. Marcus smiled at the memory of Vanessa's grandmother, a civil rights activist who had participated in lunch counter sit-ins during the 1960s. The parallel wasn't lost on him. How the simple act of staying seated could represent a profound challenge to injustice. How are you really feeling about all this attention, Vanessa asked, knowing her husband's preference for working behind the scenes. Marcus considered the question carefully. Honestly, I am uncomfortable with being called a hero, but if this incident helps expose the discriminatory practices that remain embedded in air travel, maybe some good can come of it. The videos are pretty damning, Vanessa noted. That flight attendant and the purser clearly treated you differently because of your race, and that Blackwood man's sense of entitlement was off the charts. It wasn't just them, Marcus said, recalling the silent passengers who had witnessed his mistreatment without speaking up. It was the whole culture that normalized treating certain passengers as more valuable than others. His phone chimed with another message, this one from Amara Okafor, the journalism student who had recorded the incident. She had shared the video with several major news outlets, and it had already garnered millions of views online. The journalist student wants an exclusive interview, Marcus told Vanessa. She's calling it Discrimination at 30,000 Feet. How Airline Policies Endanger Lives. Are you going to do it? Vanessa asked. Marcus walked back to the window, watching a boat glide silently down the Thames. Throughout his career, he had carefully avoided using media attention to advance his cases, preferring to let evidence and legal arguments speak for themselves. I'm not sure, he admitted. Part of me wants to focus on my arbitration case here and let this whole incident fade away. But another part feels responsible for ensuring this becomes more than just a viral moment, that it leads to actual change. Whatever you decide, I support you, Vanessa assured him. Just remember that once you step into the public spotlight this way, it's hard to step back out. Marcus nodded, though she couldn't see him. I know. My concern isn't about personal attention. It's about making sure this incident isn't reduced to a simple narrative about one bad flight attendant or one entitled passenger. The problems are much deeper and more structural. If anyone can articulate that effectively, it's you, Vanessa said confidently. As they continued their conversation, Marcus received an email alert from his legal associate in New York. The subject line read, "Similar incidents, Atlantic Airways pattern." Curious, Marcus opened it to find documented cases of minority passengers being asked to move to accommodate white passengers on Atlantic Airways flights over the past 3 years. The pattern was subtle but unmistakable once compiled. Van, I think this goes deeper than I initially thought, Marcus said, scrolling through the evidence his team had already begun gathering. My associates have found multiple instances of similar discriminatory practices at Atlantic Airways. Not surprising, Vanessa replied. These things rarely happen in isolation. Marcus's mind began connecting dots, drawing on his years of experience, identifying patterns in corporate behavior. What if this incident could be leveraged not just to address one airline's policies, but to push for industry-wide reforms? That sounds like the Marcus Taylor I know, Vanessa said warmly. Always seeing the bigger picture. As their call concluded, Marcus remained at the window, watching London's historic skyline against the night sky. What had begun as a personal confrontation over a seat assignment had evolved into something much larger, an opportunity to address long-standing inequities in air travel. The question wasn't whether to engage with this moment, but how to channel it toward meaningful, lasting change, not just for his own dignity, but for every passenger who had ever been made to feel less valuable because of their race appearance or status. Tomorrow he would still argue his arbitration case as planned. But beyond that, a new and unexpected path had opened before him, one that might ultimately have far greater impact than any courtroom victory. Marcus Taylor had never sought to be an activist or a public figure. But sometimes he reflected history places you in a seat you never asked for, and your only choice is whether to remain there and stand your ground. The massive Boeing 787 trembled softly as its engines came to life, the warm amber lights reflecting off weary faces in the business cabin. But no one on board knew that within just a few hours this flight would become the epicenter of a storm where one man dismissed and underestimated would make an entire system bow its head. The video that's gone viral shows what appears to be a clear example of discriminatory treatment. CNN anchor Dana Mitchell reported as footage played showing Monica Rivera demanding Marcus move from his seat. What began as a dispute over a business-class seat quickly escalated into a potential aviation disaster averted. The screen split to show aviation correspondent Michael Torres. Dana, what makes this incident particularly noteworthy is how it brings together two critical issues: alleged racial discrimination in air travel and potentially life-threatening oversight in aircraft maintenance. The passenger who refused to give up his seat, identified as aviation attorney Marcus Taylor, subsequently identified a serious hydraulic leak that had been missed during routine inspection. Marcus muted the television in his London hotel suite, taking a moment to absorb the surreal experience of seeing himself at the center of an international news story. His phone hadn't stopped buzzing since he'd landed in London. Journalists requesting interviews, colleagues offering support, and countless notifications from social media where #Seat8A and #DignityInFlight were trending globally. Amara Okafor, whose video had catalyzed the media storm, had already appeared on 3 morning shows, articulating the events with journalistic precision that belied her student status. Mr. Taylor wasn't just defending his right to remain in his assigned seat. She had explained on Good Morning America. He was asserting his fundamental dignity as a passenger who had paid for a service and deserved respect regardless of race or status. Marcus's email inbox overflowed with messages. Aviation safety advocates praised his identification of the hydraulic leak. Civil rights organizations requested his participation in discussions about transportation equity. Several passengers from Flight 247 had written to thank him, sharing their own observations of the incident. One email particularly caught his attention, from Professor Elaine Washington at Georgetown Law, a leading scholar on transportation law and civil rights. Mr. Taylor, she wrote, what you experienced represents a perfect case study in how discriminatory practices can intersect with safety compromises. I would be interested in discussing how this incident might inform policy reforms at the federal level. His phone rang. Elizabeth Ramirez, the VP of Operations from Atlantic Airways. Mr. Taylor, I hope I'm not interrupting your work in London. She began when he answered. Not at all, Ms. Ramirez. What can I do for you? I wanted to update you on our response to yesterday's incident. The situation has evolved significantly since our conversation at the airport. Marcus could hear the tension in her voice. I'm aware the video has received considerable attention. That's an understatement, Elizabeth replied. Our CEO, Robert Hamilton, has called an emergency board meeting. The company has issued a formal apology both to you specifically and to our passengers generally for what occurred. Marcus opened his laptop to find Atlantic Airways' statement prominently featured on their website. Atlantic Airways acknowledges the disturbing incident aboard Flight 247 on May 15th. We sincerely apologize to Mr. Marcus Taylor for the discriminatory treatment he experienced and commend his vigilance in identifying a critical safety issue. We are conducting a thorough investigation into both the inappropriate passenger reseating request and the maintenance oversight that allowed a hydraulic leak to go undetected. Immediate actions include suspended status for involved personnel, comprehensive review of our accommodation policies and enhanced maintenance inspection protocols. Atlantic Airways is committed to ensuring all passengers are treated with dignity and respect, and that our safety standards exceed industry requirements. That's a comprehensive statement, Marcus acknowledged. It needed to be, Elizabeth said frankly. The FA has already contacted us regarding the maintenance oversight, and we've received inquiries from the Department of Transportation's Office of Aviation Consumer Protection regarding our passenger treatment policies. Outside Marcus's hotel, a small group of reporters had gathered, hoping to catch him when he left for his arbitration hearing. The concierge had already offered to arrange a discreet exit through the service entrance. Mr. Taylor, Elizabeth continued, Atlantic Airways would like to arrange a formal meeting with you when you return to the States. Our CEO wants to discuss how we can address these issues in a meaningful way. Before Marcus could respond, his call waiting beeped. Sophia Rodriguez from the Washington Post, who had been persistently seeking an exclusive interview. I appreciate the invitation, Marcus told Elizabeth. Let's schedule something after I complete my work in London. This situation requires thoughtful consideration, not just reactive measures. After concluding the call, Marcus checked social media again. The hashtag #WhatWouldMarcusDo was now trending with people sharing stories of standing up to discrimination in various contexts. His simple act of refusing to move from his assigned seat had clearly struck a powerful chord. A new email alert caught his attention. This one from Julian Blackwood's attorney requesting a confidential discussion regarding recent events. Marcus marked it for later consideration. His associates in New York had continued gathering evidence, documenting not just Atlantic Airways practices, but similar incidents across multiple airlines. The pattern suggested an industry-wide problem rather than isolated incidents. On television, a panel discussion was underway featuring airline industry representatives, civil rights advocates, and safety experts. The consensus was emerging: the incident on Flight 247 represented a perfect storm of problematic practices that had long existed but rarely been captured so vividly. What's remarkable about this case, noted civil rights attorney Benjamin Harris on MSNBC, is how it exposes the intersection of racial bias and safety compromise. When airlines prioritize certain passengers based on status or implicit bias, they create environments where legitimate concerns may be dismissed based on who raises them. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. "Your father would be so proud. He always said you'd make flying safer for everyone." The comment brought unexpected emotion. William Taylor had passed away 3 years earlier, but his influence remained profound in Marcus's life and career. His father's meticulous approach to aircraft maintenance had shaped Marcus's unwavering commitment to aviation safety. As Marcus prepared for his arbitration hearing, he reflected on how quickly life could change. Yesterday morning he had been simply an attorney traveling for work. Today he had become an unwitting symbol in a national conversation about race, dignity, and safety. The media storm showed no signs of abating. If anything, it was gathering strength as more layers of the story emerged. Julian Blackwood's behavior was being scrutinized by financial media, questioning whether his conduct reflected broader issues at Blackwood Investments. Atlantic Airways stock had dropped 7% at market open as investors reacted to potential regulatory scrutiny and public relations damage. Marcus's personal principles had always guided him to use his legal expertise to create structural change rather than seek personal attention. Now thrust into the spotlight, he faced the challenge of channeling this unexpected platform toward meaningful reforms that would outlast the viral moment. As he gathered his materials for the arbitration hearing, Marcus made a decision. He would complete his professional obligations in London, then engage thoughtfully with this moment, not as a self-proclaimed activist or victim, but as an aviation attorney uniquely positioned to advocate for changes that could make air travel both safer and more equitable for all passengers. The media explosion had transformed a personal confrontation into a national conversation. The question now was how to ensure that conversation led to lasting change rather than fading with the next news cycle. Sofia Rodriguez had built her reputation at the Washington Post through meticulous investigation and an unwavering commitment to exposing patterns of inequity. When Marcus Taylor finally agreed to meet with her 3 days after returning from London, she arrived prepared with research that extended far beyond the Flight 247 incident. They sat in the conference room of Taylor and Hamilton's Baltimore office, surrounded by windows overlooking the harbor. Marcus had invited 2 of his associates to join them: Jordan Williams, a data analyst specializing in pattern recognition, and Layla Patel, an attorney focused on consumer protection law. "I appreciate you making time for this." Sophia began organizing her materials. "I understand your hesitation about becoming the face of this issue." Marcus nodded. "My concern has always been ensuring that this incident leads to structural change, not just a momentary outrage cycle." "That's precisely why I wanted to meet Sophia," replied. "This goes deeper than one confrontation on one flight." She opened her laptop, turning it to show a spreadsheet with dozens of entries. These are documented complaints filed with the Department of Transportation regarding discriminatory seating practices across major airlines over the past 5 years. We've identified 178 incidents where passengers of color were asked to move to accommodate white passengers, often under the guise of VIP accommodation or operational needs. Marcus leaned forward, studying the data. "How many of these resulted in formal investigations?" 11, Sophia replied grimly. "Less than 7%. Most were dismissed with form letter responses." Jordan Williams projected additional analysis onto the conference room screen. "We've been conducting our own investigation since you returned from London. The pattern is unmistakable when you aggregate the data." The screen displayed a color-coded visualization showing complaint rates by passenger demographics compared to resolution outcomes. Complaints filed by white passengers received substantive responses. 68% of the time, Jordan explained. For passengers of color, that number drops to 26%. Layla Patel added, "We've also received dozens of emails from airline employees since your story broke. Many describe informal but well-understood practices of giving preferential treatment to certain passengers, often white male executives, even when it means inconveniencing others." A former Atlantic Airways flight attendant, Rachel Winters, had provided particularly damning testimony about the culture aboard premium cabins. "We were never explicitly told to favor white passengers, but the message was clear from how management responded when wealthy white passengers complained versus when others did. Career advancement depended on keeping the right passengers happy." Sophia slid a document across the table, a leaked copy of Atlantic Airways Global Tier Passenger Accommodation Guidelines. "Page 17, Section 4, she directed. Marcus read aloud. "Global Tier members may request specific seating arrangements even after boarding is complete. Crew members should make every effort to accommodate these requests through passenger reseating when necessary." There's nothing explicitly discriminatory in the language, Sophia acknowledged, but in practice it creates a system where certain passengers' preferences override others' confirmed reservations. "And who are these Global Tier members, predominantly?" Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. Based on Atlantic Airways' own diversity report from last year, 87% white and 76% male. Sophia confirmed. The investigation had expanded beyond passenger treatment to include maintenance practices. Jordan displayed another dataset. "We've analyzed FA maintenance violation reports across major carriers. There's a concerning correlation between airlines with the highest rates of discrimination complaints and those with maintenance oversight issues. That suggests a common corporate culture problem," Marcus observed. "Organizations that cut corners in one area often do so in others." Layla nodded. "Exactly. It's not just about individual biased employees, it's about corporate environments that prioritize certain metrics, like VIP satisfaction or quick turnarounds, over safety and equality." The conversation was interrupted by a notification on Marcus's phone, a news alert indicating that Julian Blackwood had been placed on administrative leave by Blackwood Investments, pending an internal review of his conduct. "The consequences are spreading," Sophia noted, "but individual penalties won't address the underlying issues." Marcus agreed. This needs to be addressed at the policy level across the entire industry. They spent the next 2 hours reviewing evidence, identifying patterns, and discussing potential pathways for reform. The picture that emerged was troubling, but clear. What Marcus had experienced wasn't an isolated incident, but a manifestation of deeply embedded practices that prioritized certain passengers' comfort over others' dignity and potentially everyone's safety. "I've spoken with 3 whistleblowers from Atlantic Airways' IT department," Sophia revealed as their meeting neared its conclusion. "They've described an algorithm in the airline's booking system that flags certain passenger profiles for enhanced scrutiny." "What kind of profiles?" Marcus asked. "The criteria include unusual booking patterns, which sounds reasonable until you examine how unusual is defined. Last-minute business class bookings by passengers with non-Anglo names trigger verification protocols that identical bookings by passengers with traditionally Western European names don't." Marcus shook his head, disturbed, but not surprised. "Technology encoding human biases." "Precisely," Sophia agreed. "The algorithm was designed with the stated purpose of preventing fraud, but the effect is discriminatory treatment of certain passenger demographics." As their meeting concluded, the scope of what they were uncovering had expanded well beyond one confrontation over Seat 8A. They were documenting a comprehensive pattern of practices that collectively undermined both equality and safety in air travel. "What's your next step?" Sophia asked as they gathered their materials. Marcus considered the question carefully. "I think it's time to formally request a congressional hearing. The intersection of discrimination and safety concerns gives us leverage to demand regulatory attention." Sophia nodded approvingly. "I'll be publishing my initial findings next week. Would you be willing to go on record about your experience and what we've uncovered? For Marcus, the decision was no longer difficult. What had begun as a personal confrontation had revealed issues that affected millions of travelers. His unique position as both a victim of discrimination and an aviation safety expert created a responsibility he couldn't ignore. Yes, he agreed. This isn't just about what happened to me. It's about transforming practices that compromise both dignity and safety. As Sophia departed, Marcus remained in the conference room with his associates, reviewing the mounting evidence. The investigation had moved far beyond one flight, one airline, or one incident of discrimination. They were now documenting a pattern of interconnected problems that required comprehensive reform. The path forward would be challenging. Corporate resistance, public attention spans, and the complexity of the issues all presented obstacles. But Marcus Taylor had built his career on methodically dismantling obstacles in pursuit of aviation safety. This new challenge would require the same determination now applied to ensuring that dignity in air travel wasn't determined by race status or privilege. The investigation continued gathering momentum with each new whistleblower, each documented pattern, and each connection between discriminatory treatment and compromised safety. What had begun with one man refusing to surrender his seat was evolving into a movement for fundamental change in how airlines operated and who they truly served. The Atlantic Airways Emergency Board meeting convened on the 42nd floor of their Manhattan headquarters with panoramic views of the city that would normally inspire confidence. Today, however, the mood was decidedly grim as CEO Robert Hamilton faced the assembled directors. Our stock has dropped 18% since the incident. Hamilton reported his usual commanding presence diminished. Major institutional investors are demanding explanations, and we've received formal inquiries from 3 regulatory agencies. The boardroom screen displayed headlines from major publications. Atlantic Airways faces dual crisis discrimination and safety concerns. Flight 247 incident exposes culture of cutting corners at major airline shareholders question leadership. After viral video shows. Passenger Mistreatment Board Chair. Victoria Lawson. An imposing figure who had navigated multiple corporate crises in her career, addressed the room with characteristic directness. This situation has clearly escalated beyond a PR problem. The Atlantic Airways brand is facing its most significant threat in decades. Elizabeth Ramirez, VP of Operations, presented her assessment. The investigation has confirmed multiple failures that contributed to this incident. Our maintenance protocols missed a critical hydraulic leak. Our crew attempted to displace a passenger from his confirmed seat based solely on another passenger's status. And when that passenger identified the safety issue, his concern was initially dismissed. What are we doing to address these failures? Demanded board member Richard Okonkwo. Immediate steps include suspending the involved crew members implementing enhanced maintenance inspection protocols and suspending our global tier reaccommodation policy, Elizabeth explained. We've also issued public apologies and reached out to Mr. Taylor directly. Is that enough? Victoria asked pointedly. The Washington Post is publishing a major investigation next week, alleging pattern of discriminatory practices and safety compromises at Atlantic Airways. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. We need more comprehensive action, agreed board member Diana Rodriguez. This incident has exposed fundamental problems in our corporate culture. All eyes turned to CEO Robert Hamilton, whose leadership was now being questioned after 8 years at the helm. Hamilton had built his reputation on aggressive expansion and shareholder returns, sometimes at the expense of employee satisfaction and customer experience investments. I propose a 3-point response plan. Hamilton began attempting to regain control of the narrative. First, a high-profile diversity initiative. Second, enhanced maintenance protocols. Third, a major customer service retraining program. Victoria Lawson shook her head slowly. Robert, with respect, those sound like superficial responses to structural problems. This situation demands more fundamental change. The tension in the room was palpable as the board engaged in its most difficult discussion in years. By meeting's end, several dramatic decisions had been reached. CEO Robert Hamilton would step down effective immediately, with board chair Victoria Lawson assuming interim leadership. A comprehensive third-party audit of all Atlantic Airways policies and practices would be conducted with results made public. A new executive position, Chief Equity and Safety Officer, would be created reporting directly to the board. All crew members would undergo mandatory training on bias recognition and passenger rights. Maintenance protocols would be overhauled with enhanced redundancy checks. A $50 million fund would be established to compensate passengers who had experienced discriminatory treatment. As news of these decisions reached the public, reaction was mixed. Financial analysts questioned the leadership change, while civil rights organizations cautiously praised the accountability measures. Julian Blackwood faced his own corporate reckoning at Blackwood Investments. The video of his entitled behavior had damaged not just his personal reputation, but his company's brand. "The board has no choice but to place you on administrative leave," CEO Patricia Hammond informed him in a terse phone call. "Your conduct in that video directly contradicts our stated corporate values of respect and integrity." Julian's protests fell on deaf ears. By day's end, Blackwood Investments had issued a statement distancing itself from its CFFO's behavior. "Blackwood Investments affirms our commitment to treating all people with dignity and respect. The conduct displayed by our CFO, Julian Blackwood, in the recently circulated video does not reflect our company's values, Mr. Blackwood has been placed on administrative leave pending a comprehensive review." Across the industry, other airlines watched these developments with concern, recognizing their vulnerability to similar incidents. Several proactively announced reviews of their own passenger accommodation policies and maintenance protocols. The most significant corporate response, however, came when Marcus Taylor finally met with Atlantic Airways' new interim CEO, Victoria Lawson. Rather than a perfunctory apology meeting, it evolved into a substantive discussion about industry-wide reforms. Mr. Taylor, Victoria began. "I want to thank you for agreeing to meet, despite your understandable reservations about our company." Marcus nodded acknowledgement. "I appreciate your willingness to have a forthright conversation about these issues. What happened on Flight 247 was inexcusable," Victoria stated directly. "But more concerning is what our subsequent investigation has revealed about patterns within our organization. Patterns that I suspect exist throughout the industry. That aligns with my findings as well," Marcus confirmed. Victoria leaned forward. "Here's what I'm proposing. Atlantic Airways will implement comprehensive reforms, but will also lead an industry-wide initiative for standardized passenger rights protections and enhanced safety accountability." "That's an ambitious goal," Marcus observed. "The industry has historically resisted external accountability measures, which is precisely why change needs to come from within," Victoria replied. "We're in a unique position to lead this transformation, and I believe you're in a unique position to help shape it." By meeting's end, they had outlined a framework for what would become the Taylor Protocol, a comprehensive set of standards for both passenger treatment and safety reporting that would eventually be adopted across the industry. As Marcus left Atlantic Airways headquarters, he reflected on the unexpected path that had led to this moment. His refusal to surrender Seat 8A had triggered a chain reaction of accountability that was reshaping not just one company, but potentially an entire industry's approach to both passenger dignity and safety protocols. Corporate America often spoke about accountability, but rarely embraced it in practice. This situation had created enough public pressure and regulatory attention that meaningful change became the only viable option. Whether that change would be lasting or merely cosmetic remained to be seen, but the structures being put in place suggested possibilities for a transformation that extended far beyond one flight or one airline. The true measure of corporate accountability, Marcus knew, would come not in press releases or policy documents, but in the day-to-day experiences of ordinary passengers in the months and years ahead. For now, at least, the message had been sent. Ignoring passenger dignity could no longer be treated as a standard cost of doing business. The Congressional hearing room buzzed with tension. Camera crews positioned their equipment strategically, knowing this session of the House Transportation Committee would generate significant news. Representatives from major airlines, regulatory agencies, civil rights organizations, and safety advocacy groups filled the chamber, all waiting for the testimony of the man at the center of it all. Marcus Taylor approached the witness table with measured steps, conscious of the gravity of the moment, but composed as always. Behind him sat Vanessa, alongside Sofia Rodriguez and representatives from civil rights organizations who had joined the growing movement for aviation reform. Mr. Taylor began, Chairwoman Representative Eleanor Jordan. Thank you for appearing before this committee today. Your experience aboard Atlantic Airways Flight 247 has sparked a national conversation about passenger rights and airline safety. Would you please share your account of what transpired? Marcus leaned toward the microphone. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman and committee members, for this opportunity. What began as a dispute over a seat assignment revealed troubling patterns that compromise both passenger dignity and safety within our aviation system. Over the next 20 minutes, Marcus provided a measured account of the incident, careful to focus not just on his personal experience, but on the structural issues it exposed. This was never about one seat or one flight, he explained. When I refused to be moved from my assigned seat, I was asserting a principle that should apply to all passengers, that our dignity and rights don't depend on our status, appearance, or race. Representative Jordan nodded. And the hydraulic leak you identified, how does that connect to these concerns about passenger treatment? They reflect the same fundamental problem, Marcus replied. A corporate culture that prioritizes status and expediency over fairness and safety. When airlines create environments where certain passengers' preferences override others' rights, they also create conditions where legitimate safety concerns might be dismissed based on who raises them. FAA Administrator Michael Donovan testified next, acknowledging regulatory gaps in both maintenance oversight and passenger rights protection. The incident on Flight 247 has prompted a comprehensive review of our inspection protocols, Donovan admitted. We've identified concerning patterns where maintenance issues were documented but not adequately addressed before aircraft were returned to service. The most dramatic moment came when Elizabeth Ramirez, representing Atlantic Airways, publicly committed to sweeping reforms. Atlantic Airways acknowledges that we failed both in our treatment of Mr. Taylor and in our maintenance oversight, she stated. We are implementing comprehensive changes to our policies and practices, and we support the development of industry-wide standards for passenger rights and safety accountability. By day's end, the outline of significant regulatory reform had emerged. The FAA would implement enhanced inspection requirements for hydraulic systems across all commercial aircraft. The Department of Transportation would establish clear guidelines prohibiting discriminatory passenger reaccommodation practices. Airlines would be required to transparently report all instances where passengers were asked to change seats after boarding. Whistleblower protections would be strengthened for airline employees reporting either safety concerns or discriminatory practices. The hearing marked a turning point, but the work of reform continued long after the cameras departed. Marcus found himself increasingly involved in shaping new regulations and industry standards, drawing on his unique expertise as both an aviation attorney and someone who had experienced discrimination firsthand. 2 months after the hearing, Marcus received an unexpected invitation to address the International Air Transport Association's annual conference in Geneva, traditionally an industry-only gathering that rarely included outside perspectives. We're at a crossroads, Marcus told the assembled airline executives from around the world. The old model of treating certain passengers as more valuable than others isn't just morally wrong, it's become a business liability and a safety risk. His proposed framework, what had become known as the Taylor Protocol, outlined clear standards for both passenger treatment and safety reporting that airlines could adopt voluntarily ahead of regulatory requirements. Leadership means recognizing the need for change before it's mandated, Marcus concluded. The airlines that embrace these standards won't just be doing what's right, they'll be positioning themselves for success in an industry where public trust is essential. To his surprise, the response was largely positive. Several international carriers announced immediate adoption of the Taylor Protocol, creating momentum that American Airlines felt pressured to match. The legal reforms extended beyond regulations to actual case law. Marcus represented a group of passengers who had experienced similar discriminatory treatment, establishing an important precedent regarding airlines' responsibilities under civil rights statutes. The court finds that policies allowing preferential reaccommodation based on a passenger status can create disparate impact discrimination when applied in practice, wrote Federal Judge Maria Hernandez in her landmark ruling. Airlines must ensure that such practices do not result in disproportionate, adverse treatment of protected classes. This judicial recognition of the structural nature of the problem represented a significant victory, one that would influence airline policies for years to come. Perhaps the most meaningful development came when Marcus was invited to help design new training protocols for both flight crews and maintenance personnel, bringing together the dual concerns of passenger dignity and safety that his experience had highlighted. What happened on Flight 247 revealed how these issues are interconnected, Marcus explained to a group of airline trainers. A culture that dismisses certain passengers' dignity might also dismiss their observations about safety concerns. Both stem from the same failure to truly value every person aboard. The industry was changing, albeit slowly and sometimes reluctantly. Regulatory reforms provided external pressure, while forward-thinking executives recognized the business case for treating all passengers with respect and taking every safety concern seriously, regardless of its source. For Marcus, this unexpected role as a catalyst for industry-wide change provided a platform to address issues he had long recognized, but never had the opportunity to influence so directly. His legal expertise, combined with his personal experience, created a unique credibility that proved persuasive in both regulatory and corporate settings. As he told Vanessa after returning from Geneva, "I never sought this spotlight. But now that it's found me, I'm determined to use it for lasting change, not just in policies on paper, but in how people experience air travel in practice." The legal and regulatory reforms sparked by one confrontation over Seat 8A were gradually reshaping an industry that had long resisted external accountability. The true measure of success would come not in hearings or headlines, but in the countless flights where passengers of all backgrounds would be treated with equal dignity and their safety concerns taken seriously. Changes largely invisible, but profoundly important to those affected. Sometimes, Marcus reflected, the most significant transformations begin with the simplest acts of principle, like refusing to move from your rightful place when everyone expects you to step aside. The luxury hotel conference room in Chicago felt worlds away from the tense confrontation aboard Flight 247 3 months earlier. Marcus sat alone reviewing notes for his upcoming presentation to aviation safety executives when a knock at the door interrupted his preparation. "Mr. Taylor, do you have a moment?" The woman standing in the doorway was immediately recognizable, though she looked different out of uniform. Monica Rivera, the flight attendant who had demanded he give up his seat for Julian Blackwood. Marcus concealed his surprise. "Ms. Rivera, this is unexpected." I know, she acknowledged, hands clasped nervously before her. "The conference organizers told me you were speaking today. I'm here for the flight attendant union panel this afternoon." Marcus gestured to a chair. Please come in. Monica sat, clearly uncomfortable but determined. I've been wanting to reach out since what happened? I needed to apologize to you personally, not just through corporate statements or lawyers. Her voice carried genuine remorse. What I did was wrong. I treated you differently than I would have treated other passengers, and I've had to face that reality about myself. Marcus studied her, noting the difficulty this conversation clearly posed for her. I appreciate you coming to say this in person. After the incident, I spent weeks angry and defensive. Monica continued. I kept telling myself I was just following procedures, that it wasn't about race. But then I started really examining my behavior. Not just with you, but patterns throughout my career. She took a deep breath. I realized I had different standards for different passengers. I'd never have spoken to a white executive the way I spoke to you, even in the same situation. What changed your perspective? Marcus asked. Honestly, being forced to confront it. After my suspension, I had a lot of time to reflect. I also enrolled in a bias recognition program through my church. It's been eye-opening. Marcus nodded. Self-examination isn't easy. No, it isn't, Monica agreed. I lost my job of 15 years. At first I blamed you for that, but gradually I recognized that I was responsible for my own actions. What are you doing now? Marcus inquired. I'm working with the Flight Attendants Union on their new Equity and Dignity initiative, she explained, using my experience, my mistake, to help others recognize and address bias in passenger interactions. She hesitated before adding, I know an apology doesn't erase what happened, but I wanted you to know that your stand that day changed more than airline policies. It changed people, including me. This unexpected encounter represented something Marcus had rarely witnessed in his legal career, genuine personal transformation resulting from accountability. Later that same week, an email arrived from Diego Hernandez, the purser who had threatened to have Marcus removed from the flight. Unlike Monica, Diego hadn't sought a personal meeting, but his message conveyed similar self-reflection. Mr. Taylor, I've drafted this email dozens of times over the past months. No words seem adequate to address my behavior during our encounter on Flight 247. I failed in my responsibility as a purser to treat all passengers with equal respect and dignity. More troublingly, I failed to take your safety concerns seriously because I had already categorized you as difficult rather than credible. This incident has forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about how I've wielded authority throughout my career. I'm now working with a civil rights organization to develop training programs for aviation personnel focused on recognizing and addressing bias in safety reporting. Your dignified response to discrimination potentially saved lives that day. I can only hope that my work now helps ensure no passenger faces similar treatment in the future. These personal transformations extended beyond the airline employees directly involved. Julian Blackwood. After initially retreating from public view following his administrative leave from Blackwood Investments, eventually reached out through his attorney requesting a private meeting with Marcus. Against Vanessa's skeptical advice, Marcus agreed to meet Julian at a neutral location, a private room at the Baltimore Yacht Club. Julian appeared dramatically changed from their encounter on Flight 247. Gone was the arrogant executive who had demanded special treatment. In his place sat a humbled man, clearly uncomfortable in his own skin. Thank you for agreeing to meet, Julian began awkwardly. I wouldn't have blamed you for refusing. Marcus simply nodded, waiting for him to continue. I've spent the past 4 months in a pretty dark place, Julian admitted. Lost my position at Blackwood, lost friends, nearly lost my marriage. The video showed everyone who I really was, and it wasn't someone I could defend. What prompted you to reach out now? Marcus asked. Julian sighed heavily. My therapist suggested it as part of my recovery process, making amends where possible. But that's not why I'm really here. I'm here because I need to acknowledge directly to you how wrong I was. I appreciate that. Marcus replied simply. The thing is, Julian continued, I never saw myself as prejudiced. I donated to the right causes. I had black colleagues I respected. I thought that was enough. But when it came to who deserved that seat, Marcus prompted. Julian nodded soberly. Exactly. When it really mattered, my true assumptions showed. I automatically felt entitled to displace you because at some level I wouldn't have admitted even to myself I didn't see you as equal. The admission hung in the air between them. What happens now for you? Marcus asked, not unkindly. I've started volunteering with a community development program in West Baltimore, Julian replied. I'm using my financial expertise to help minority entrepreneurs secure funding. It's not about image rehabilitation. It's about actually contributing something meaningful. As their conversation concluded, Julian asked hesitantly, Do you think people can really change after a lifetime of certain assumptions? Marcus considered the question carefully. I believe meaningful change is possible, but it requires ongoing commitment, not just momentary regret. The test isn't what you say in private conversations like this. It's how you treat the next person when no one's recording. These personal transformations, while meaningful, weren't Marcus's primary focus. His work continued on the structural reforms that would have broader impact. Yet these individual stories of reflection and change suggested something powerful, that addressing institutional problems sometimes began with personal reckonings. Vanessa observed this phenomenon over dinner after Marcus recounted his meeting with Julian. It's interesting, she noted. Your legal work has always focused on changing systems, not people, but in this case, you're seeing both happen simultaneously. The personal transformations won't matter much without the structural changes, Marcus replied. But you're right. Seeing individual people confront their biases and actually change their behavior is something I rarely witnessed in my legal practice. That's because lawsuits usually make people defensive, Vanessa suggested. This situation was different. The video evidence was so clear and your response so dignified that it created space for self-reflection rather than just defensiveness. Marcus considered this insight. Throughout his career, he had focused on using legal leverage to force institutional change, often against fierce resistance. The transformation sparked by the Flight 247 incident suggested another pathway, one where personal accountability and structural reform reinforced each other. As he prepared for his next congressional testimony on aviation safety reforms, Marcus incorporated this understanding. Lasting change required addressing both the written policies that enabled discrimination and the unwritten assumptions that individuals carried within themselves, assumptions that could compromise both dignity and safety when left unexamined. The personal transformations emanating from Flight 247 wouldn't change the industry overnight, but they represented important reminders that behind every policy procedure and protocol were human beings capable of both harmful bias and meaningful growth. Acknowledging this humanity didn't excuse the discrimination Marcus had faced, but it did illuminate pathways toward more comprehensive change than legal remedies alone could achieve. The grand ballroom of the Geneva International Conference Center hummed with anticipation. Airlines executives, safety regulators, and aviation industry leaders from 6 continents had gathered for the opening session of the Global Aviation Summit, and this year's keynote speaker represented a significant departure from tradition. Marcus Taylor approached the podium with measured steps, surveying the audience of over 2,000 industry professionals. A year ago, many in this room would have viewed him as an adversary, the attorney whose stand against discrimination had triggered uncomfortable scrutiny of long-established practices. Today he stood before them as an architect of transformation. Good morning, Marcus, began his voice, steady and resonant throughout the hall. A year ago, I boarded a flight as a passenger and found myself at the center of a confrontation that none of us in this room could have predicted would transform aviation practices worldwide. The screens behind him displayed a single image: Seat 8A on Atlantic Airways Flight 247. What happened that day wasn't just about one seat, one passenger, or one airline. Marcus continued. It exposed interconnected failures that compromised both passenger dignity and safety. Failures that existed not just at one company, but throughout our global aviation system. He paused, allowing the weight of this assessment to register. Today I'm not here to revisit that incident, but to share the remarkable progress we've made together over the past 12 months in addressing these challenges. Marcus moved to the core of his presentation, the data-driven results of the reforms that had been implemented across the industry. The Taylor Protocol has now been adopted by 127 airlines, representing 86% of global passenger traffic, he reported. Early results are promising. Complaints regarding discriminatory treatment have declined by 72% among participating carriers. More significantly, reported safety concerns from passengers have increased by 64%, with 31% of these reports identifying legitimate issues requiring maintenance attention. Murmurs of approval rippled through the audience as executives recognized the dual benefits. Fewer discrimination claims meant reduced legal exposure, while increased safety reporting potentially prevented costly incidents. These numbers tell an important story, Marcus explained. When we create environments where every passenger is treated with equal dignity, we also create conditions where safety observations are taken seriously, regardless of who reports them. He displayed a slide showing maintenance metrics before and after implementation of the enhanced inspection protocols developed following the Flight 247 incident. Prior to these reforms, approximately 8% of hydraulic system issues were identified only after aircraft had already been dispatched for flight. Today, that number has fallen to less than 2%. This represents hundreds of potential in-flight emergencies prevented before they could develop. Marcus acknowledged the industry leaders who had championed these changes, including Victoria Lawson, who had transitioned from interim to permanent CEO at Atlantic Airways after spearheading their reform efforts. The skeptics among us, and I know there were many, predicted these changes would increase costs, delay flights, and create operational chaos, Marcus noted. The data tells a different story. Airlines implementing the Taylor Protocol have seen average maintenance costs decrease by 7% due to earlier issue identification. On-time performance has improved by 3.2%, with fewer mid-route diversions for mechanical issues. He shifted to addressing the human element of these changes. Beyond the metrics, what matters most is the experience of individual travelers, particularly those from minority communities who have historically borne the brunt of discriminatory treatment. Our independent passenger surveys show significantly improved experiences for travelers of all backgrounds, with the gap in satisfaction ratings between white passengers and passengers of color narrowing by 68%. The presentation continued with specific case studies demonstrating how reformed practices had improved both operational efficiency and passenger experience. Throughout, Marcus maintained his characteristic balance, celebrating progress without suggesting the work was complete. We've made remarkable strides, he acknowledged in his conclusion, but lasting change requires ongoing vigilance. The structures we've built together, from the enhanced FAA inspection protocols to the passenger dignity standards, are only as effective as our commitment to upholding them. The standing ovation that followed was led by Victoria Lawson herself, the executive who had transformed Atlantic Airways from the epicenter of controversy to a leader in industry reform. As Marcus moved through the reception that followed, his keynote conversations with industry leaders revealed how thoroughly the landscape had shifted in just 12 months. The Taylor Protocol saved us from ourselves, admitted Richard Barton, CEO of Pacific West Airlines. We were so focused on VIP satisfaction metrics that we'd lost sight of our responsibilities to all passengers. Implementing these standards has actually improved our overall customer satisfaction while reducing our legal exposure. FAA Administrator Michael Donovan shared similarly positive assessments of the regulatory reforms. The enhanced inspection requirements initially faced resistance as unnecessary bureaucracy, he confided to Marcus. Now we're seeing carriers voluntarily exceeding those requirements because they've recognized the operational benefits of earlier issue identification. The most meaningful conversation came when Marcus encountered Monica Rivera, who now led the Flight Attendant Union's equity training program. "Your keynote didn't mention something important," she noted. "These changes aren't just improving passenger experiences, they're transforming working conditions for flight crews as well. When we're not pressured to accommodate inappropriate demands from VIP passengers, we can focus on actual safety and service for everyone." As the conference continued, Marcus participated in panel discussions on the future of aviation safety and passenger rights. Throughout, he maintained his focus on structural reforms rather than individual blame, an approach that had proven crucial to securing industry-wide cooperation. The final day brought an unexpected announcement from the International Air Transport Association, the creation of a permanent Passenger Dignity and Safety Council, with Marcus invited to serve as one of its founding members. "A year ago, I was nearly removed from a flight for refusing to surrender my seat," Marcus observed in accepting the appointment. "Today, the industry is asking me to help shape its future approach to passenger treatment. That transformation reflects something important. When confronted with clear evidence of problems, this industry has demonstrated the capacity for meaningful change." As he prepared to return home, Marcus reflected on the journey of the past year. What had begun with a simple refusal to be displaced from his assigned seat had catalyzed reforms that were now reshaping air travel for millions of passengers worldwide. The metrics and policy changes were important, but they represented something deeper, a fundamental shift in recognizing that dignity and safety were interconnected values that benefited everyone. The work wasn't complete, and maintaining these changes would require continued advocacy and vigilance. But as Marcus boarded his flight home, seated fittingly in 8A, he allowed himself a moment to appreciate how far they had come. The flight attendant who welcomed him aboard did so with the same respect afforded to every passenger, not the differential treatment once reserved for those deemed more valuable. In that simple interaction was the evidence of lasting change, not just in policies on paper, but in the lived experience of air travel for everyone on board. The federal courthouse in Washington, D.C. fell silent as Judge Miranda Coleman delivered her ruling in Taylor v. National Air Transport Association. After 6 months of litigation and 3 weeks of testimony, the landmark case had reached its conclusion. "This court finds in favor of the plaintiffs," Judge Coleman stated firmly. "The evidence clearly establishes that the defendant airlines engaged in a pattern of discriminatory passenger reaccommodation practices that violated Title VI of the Civil Rights Act." Marcus Taylor sat at the plaintiffs' table representing 27 passengers who had experienced treatment similar to his own on Flight 247. Unlike his personal incident, which had been resolved without litigation, this class action sought to establish binding legal precedent regarding airlines' responsibilities under civil rights statutes. The court further finds Judge Coleman continued that policies allowing preferential treatment based solely on passenger status create an impermissible disparate impact on protected classes. The defendants are hereby ordered to implement comprehensive reforms and establish a $42.5 million compensation fund for affected passengers. As the courtroom erupted in muted celebration, Marcus remained composed, exchanging handshakes with his legal team. This verdict represented more than financial compensation. It established judicial recognition of the structural nature of the discrimination these passengers had faced. Outside on the courthouse steps, Marcus addressed the gathered media. "Today's ruling confirms what we've maintained throughout this litigation, that passenger dignity isn't a luxury or a privilege, but a fundamental right that must be equally protected regardless of race, gender, or status." The victory carried personal significance beyond its legal importance. Throughout his career, Marcus had won numerous aviation cases, but they had typically focused on technical safety violations rather than the human dignity issues that disproportionately affected minority travelers. That evening, Marcus celebrated the verdict with Vanessa over dinner at their favorite restaurant in Baltimore. "I'm so proud of you," she told him, raising her glass in toast. "Not just for winning the case, but for how you've handled this entire journey." Marcus smiled. "It's been quite a year. Remember when you called me from that hotel in London?" Vanessa reminisced. "You were so concerned about becoming a public figure rather than staying focused on your legal work." "I still prefer working behind the scenes," Marcus admitted, "but sometimes the moment chooses you. And you chose to rise to it," Vanessa added. "You could have settled privately with Atlantic Airways and moved on. Instead, you used that platform to create change that will help countless people you'll never meet." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the restaurant's owner, Maria Gonzalez, who approached their table with visible emotion. "Mr. Taylor," she said, "I hope you don't mind the interruption, but I wanted to thank you personally. My son was on an Atlantic Airways flight last month. When he was asked to move from his seat to accommodate another passenger, the flight attendant immediately stopped and apologized when another passenger mentioned the Taylor protocol. My son was able to stay in his assigned seat with dignity. This simple story, one person's experience improved because of the changes Marcus had helped create, moved him more deeply than the landmark legal victory or industry accolades. Thank you for telling me that," he replied sincerely. "That's what this has all been about." After Maria returned to the kitchen, Vanessa reached across the table to squeeze Marcus's hand. "Your father would be so incredibly proud." The mention of his father brought unexpected emotion. William Taylor had spent his career ensuring aircraft were safe for everyone who boarded them. Now his son had expanded that legacy to ensure those same passengers were treated with equal dignity regardless of who they were. The following morning, Marcus received a call from Elizabeth Ramirez at Atlantic Airways. "I wanted to congratulate you on yesterday's verdict," she began. "Though my airline wasn't named in this specific case, we recognize its importance for the industry." "Thank you, Elizabeth. I appreciate that. There's another reason for my call," she continued. "Our board has approved the creation of a passenger advocate office with direct reporting to the CEO. We'd like to offer you the role of establishing this office and serving as its first external advisory director." The offer caught Marcus by surprise. "That's an interesting proposal. What exactly would the position entail?" "Essentially, you'd help design and oversee the systems that ensure we maintain the reforms implemented over the past year," Elizabeth explained. "It would be a part-time role that wouldn't interfere with your legal practice, but would give you direct input into our ongoing transformation." Marcus promised to consider the offer, recognizing its potential for continuing the work of reform from within the industry rather than solely through external pressure. Later that week, he discussed the opportunity with Jordan Williams and Layla Patel, the associates who had worked closely with him throughout this journey. "It's an intriguing proposition," Layla acknowledged. "Having a voice inside the airline could complement our external advocacy work." Jordan nodded agreement. "The data suggests that Atlantic Airways has genuinely committed to these reforms. Their implementation of the Taylor Protocol has been the most comprehensive in the industry." Marcus valued their perspectives, but the most meaningful input came from Vanessa, who understood better than anyone the personal significance of this decision. "You've always believed in working within systems to change them," she reminded him as they discussed the offer one evening. "This might be an opportunity to ensure these reforms outlast the current attention cycle." After careful consideration, Marcus accepted the advisory role with specific conditions: independence, transparency, and the ability to publicly resign if the airline failed to maintain its commitments to both safety and dignity. The personal victory represented by this development wasn't about professional advancement or public recognition. It was about having helped create conditions where an airline that had once threatened to remove him from a flight now sought his guidance in transforming its approach to passenger treatment. 1 year after the Flight 247 incident, Marcus Taylor had achieved what few attorneys ever manage, helping establish new legal precedent while simultaneously fostering voluntary industry reform. The changes weren't perfect or complete, but they represented meaningful progress in addressing long-standing inequities in air travel. As he often reminded his legal team, lasting change isn't about perfect solutions immediately. It's about establishing new baselines that become the foundation for further progress. The verdict in Taylor v. National Air Transport Association had established one such baseline. The industry adoption of the Taylor Protocol had created another. Together, they formed a foundation for continuing the work of ensuring that dignity in air travel wasn't determined by race status or privilege, a personal victory that extended far beyond Marcus himself to benefit millions of travelers he would never meet. The university auditorium was filled to capacity with students sitting in aisles and standing along the back wall. Georgetown law professor Elaine Washington gestured to the slide displayed on the screen. A still image from the Flight 247 video showing Marcus Taylor calmly refusing to surrender his seat. This moment, she told her transportation law and civil rights students, has become what we call a cultural inflection point, an incident that captures existing tensions so perfectly that it catalyzes broader social change. The class was analyzing how the Flight 247 incident had transcended its specific circumstances to influence everything from legal education to corporate training to popular media. The Taylor case, as it had become known in legal circles, was now taught in law schools nationwide, illustrating the intersection of transportation law, civil rights statutes, and regulatory authority. The court's ruling had established important precedent regarding disparate impact discrimination in service provision. Beyond academia, the incident had permeated broader cultural awareness. A documentary film titled Seat 8A, How One Man's Stand Changed Aviation, had premiered at the Sundance Film Festival, winning critical acclaim for its nuanced exploration of both discrimination and safety issues in air travel. Director Amara Okafor, the journalism student who had recorded the original Confrontation, had expanded her initial reporting into a feature-length examination of how race class and status influenced transportation experiences. Her film included interviews with flight crews, airline executives, safety experts, and passengers from diverse backgrounds. What makes this story compelling, Amara explained during a panel discussion following the film's premiere, is that it isn't just about one incident of discrimination. It's about how addressing that discrimination ultimately made air travel safer for everyone. It demonstrates how justice and safety are interconnected values. The cultural impact extended to corporate America, where the Flight 247 incident had become a standard case study in diversity training programs. Major corporations beyond the airline industry had recognized parallels to their own customer service practices, prompting broader examination of how implicit bias influenced which customers received preferential treatment. Julian Blackwood, in an unexpected development, had become an advocate for corporate accountability after his own very public downfall. Following therapy and reflection, he had written a widely shared article titled, "My Privilege Blinded Me," examining how his sense of entitlement had manifested in the infamous confrontation. "I believed my status entitled me to displace someone else from their rightful place," Julian wrote. "It took losing my own position of privilege to recognize how deeply this assumption had been embedded in my worldview." After initially declining most media requests, Marcus had eventually agreed to a single in-depth interview with PBS Frontline, focusing not on personal vindication, but on the structural issues exposed by the incident. "What happened on that flight revealed problems that had existed for decades," he explained. The significant progress we've seen since then demonstrates that these weren't intractable issues. They simply required the will to address them. Perhaps the most significant cultural impact came through the educational programs developed for both aviation professionals and the traveling public. The Dignity in Flight curriculum, now mandatory for all U.S. flight crews, used the Flight 247 incident as its central case study in examining how bias affected safety reporting and passenger treatment. Before this incident, our training focused primarily on service standards and emergency procedures. Explained Gabriela Fernandez, a veteran flight attendant who helped develop the curriculum. Now we explicitly address how implicit bias can affect our interactions with passengers, and potentially our response to safety concerns. For the traveling public, the Taylor Protocol had become recognized shorthand for passenger rights. A mobile app developed by consumer advocates had been downloaded over 2 million times, allowing travelers to easily access information about their rights and report potential violations. Cultural references to the incident appeared in unexpected places, from late-night comedy monologues to a subplot in a popular network drama. These pop culture mentions, while often simplified, helped maintain public awareness of the underlying issues long after the initial news cycle had passed. 1 year after Flight 247, Marcus Taylor had not sought to become a household name or public figure. Yet his actions had undeniably influenced how millions of people thought about fairness, safety, and dignity in everyday interactions. The cultural impact extended far beyond aviation to spark broader conversations about whose concerns were taken seriously and whose comfort was prioritized in various settings. As Professor Washington concluded her lecture at Georgetown Law, she emphasized this broader significance. The Taylor case matters not just for its legal precedent, but for how it has changed our collective understanding of what constitutes acceptable treatment in public accommodations. Sometimes a single incident captured at the right moment and involving the right individual can illuminate long-standing problems so clearly that ignoring them is no longer possible. The students nodded, many of them having experienced or witnessed similar if less dramatic incidents of discrimination in their own lives. The Flight 247 confrontation had given name and form to experiences that previously might have been dismissed as isolated or ambiguous. After class, a young black law student approached Professor Washington. "Do you think these changes will last?" she asked. "Or will things eventually go back to how they were once the attention fades?" Washington considered the question thoughtfully. Cultural change is never linear or guaranteed, but what makes the Taylor case different is that it created concrete structural reforms, legal precedent, regulatory requirements, corporate policies, that will outlast the initial attention cycle. Those structures create the foundation for lasting change, even if vigilance will always be necessary. As the student nodded and departed, Washington reflected on how the Flight 247 incident had already influenced this next generation of legal professionals. These students would enter their careers with different baseline expectations about dignity, safety, and accountability than those who had come before them. That shifting baseline represented perhaps the most profound cultural impact, not just changing current practices, but reshaping assumptions for the future. In that sense, Marcus Taylor's refusal to surrender Seat 8A had become more than a moment of personal courage. It had evolved into a cultural touchstone that would influence how people understood fairness and dignity long after the specific details of Flight 247 had faded from memory. The Atlantic Airways flight from New York to Chicago cruised at 36,000 feet, its cabin serene and comfortable. Marcus Taylor sat in Seat 9C, reviewing briefs for an upcoming case, while occasionally glancing out the window at the vast landscape below. 2 years had passed since the Flight 247 incident. In that time, his life had followed an unexpected trajectory. From respected but relatively unknown aviation attorney to reluctant symbol in a national conversation about dignity and safety. The attention had gradually diminished, allowing Marcus to return to the quieter work of legal advocacy that had always been his preference. A young flight attendant approached his row. "Mr. Taylor," she asked softly. "I hope I'm not interrupting, but I recognized your name on the passenger manifest. I just wanted to thank you personally." Marcus looked up, setting his work aside. "No interruption at all. Thank you for what I'm Alicia Martinez," she explained. "I graduated from flight attendant training 6 months ago. Your case is a central part of our curriculum now. It completely changed how we're taught to approach passenger interactions and safety concerns." Marcus nodded appreciatively. "That's good to hear. How has the implementation been in practice?" Transformative Alicia replied without hesitation. "The Taylor Protocol isn't just a policy on paper. It's become part of our professional identity. We're explicitly trained to recognize and question our own potential biases and to take all safety concerns seriously, regardless of who raises them." Their conversation was briefly interrupted by the captain's voice over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Reynolds speaking. We're about to begin our pre-landing Taylor Protocol safety check. Our maintenance team completed a comprehensive inspection before departure, but your observations are valuable additional assurance. If you notice anything unusual about the aircraft, please don't hesitate to inform our cabin crew." This announcement, now standard across most major airlines, represented one of the most visible legacies of the Flight 247 incident. By formally inviting passenger observations, airlines had created a culture where safety vigilance was everyone's responsibility, not just the crew's. "That announcement still makes me smile," Marcus admitted to Alicia. "Not because of the name, but because it represents such a fundamental shift in approach." Alicia nodded. "We've had 3 significant maintenance issues identified by passengers in my short time flying. Issues that might have gone unnoticed until they became more serious. Lives potentially saved because we're actually listening to everyone on board." As she continued to her duties, Marcus returned to his window view, reflecting on the journey of the past 2 years. The legal victories, policy changes, and cultural impact had all been important. But perhaps the most meaningful outcome was this simple shift. From a culture where certain passengers were valued above others, to one where every person's dignity and observations were respected. The plane began its descent into Chicago, the city skyline emerging through scattered clouds. Marcus thought about his father, who had spent his career ensuring aircraft were safe for everyone who boarded them. William Taylor would have appreciated how his son had expanded that legacy, ensuring those same passengers were not only physically safe, but treated with equal dignity, regardless of who they were. As the aircraft touched down smoothly on the runway, Marcus felt a quiet satisfaction that had nothing to do with personal recognition. The true power of what had happened wasn't about one man's stand or one viral video. It was about how that moment had catalyzed changes that benefited countless travelers who would never know his name. The most profound transformation wasn't measured in headlines or policy documents, but in thousands of daily interactions aboard aircraft worldwide. Interactions where dignity was no longer determined by status or appearance, where safety concerns weren't dismissed based on who raised them. True power, Marcus had learned, wasn't about forcing others to move for you. It was about standing firm in your rightful place while helping create conditions where everyone could do the same. As passengers gathered their belongings and prepared to disembark, Marcus overheard a flight attendant respectfully addressing an elderly black woman who had raised a concern about an unusual sound during landing. The crew member took her observation seriously, immediately reporting it to the cockpit. In that simple interaction, dignified, respectful, potentially life-saving, was the evidence of lasting change. Not perfect or complete, but meaningful progress toward the world Marcus had always worked to create through his legal advocacy. Sometimes he reflected as he stepped into the terminal, the most significant journeys begin with simply refusing to move when dignity demands you stay right where you are. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing powerful narratives of people standing up against discrimination and creating positive change. Have you ever witnessed or experienced similar situations? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We believe that by sharing these stories, we can inspire others to stand firm in their dignity and advocate for fair treatment for all. Don't forget to share this video with friends and family who might need to hear this message of courage and transformation. Together we can create a world where everyone is treated with respect, regardless of their race, status, or appearance. Remember, sometimes the most powerful act of courage is simply refusing to move from your rightful place.